First-class truth. The day dignity boarded and discrimination was grounded. The terminal buzzed with the usual chorus of rolling suitcases, quick footsteps, and overhead announcements. At gate 34, everything appeared routine. Travelers scrolled on their phones, sipped overpriced coffee, and waited for their boarding groups to be called. The sun outside the terminal windows was just beginning to sink behind the skyline, casting a golden hue across the polished floor. Standing beside the boarding kiosk was Abigail Rowe, a flight attendant with 8 years under her belt. Her hair was tightly pulled back, her uniform crisp, and her expression unreadable. She was known for her punctuality, attention to detail, and no-nonsense approach. But what happened that day would expose more than just a lapse in professionalism. It would unravel a system many had long suspected, but few dared to confront head-on. At 5:47 p.m., just 7 minutes before boarding was set to begin, a couple approached the gate. Julian and Sierra Preston had arrived early. Their itinerary was simple: a nonstop flight to San Diego, first class, seats 2A and 2B. Julian wore a tailored blazer over a white t-shirt and dark jeans. Sierra, graceful and poised, carried herself in a way that was both grounded and self-assured. Both held matching leather carry-outs. They walked with calm purpose, engaged in quiet conversation. As they reached the front of the line, Abigail's eyes narrowed. She didn't smile. "Boarding passes," she said curtly. Julian handed them over without hesitation. "First class," he said with a friendly nod. Abigail barely looked at the screen. Instead, her eyes moved between their faces and their tickets. Her lips tightened. "I'll need to verify these." She turned without waiting for a response and walked quickly to the terminal computer. Her fingers tapped the keys with urgency. Julian and Sierra stood silently, exchanging a glance but saying nothing. A few passengers behind them began to whisper. Some rolled their eyes, annoyed by the delay. Others pretended not to notice, but watched with veiled interest. Abigail returned, her face unreadable. "There seems to be a discrepancy," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "I'm going to ask you both to step aside while we resolve this." Julian tilted his head slightly. "A discrepancy?" he asked. "These tickets were purchased weeks ago." "I'm aware. Please wait over there." Sierra opened her mouth to speak, but Julian gently touched her arm. "Let's just see where this goes," he whispered. They stepped aside. Passengers continued to file in, but a subtle shift in energy settled over the gate. Eyes flicked toward the Prestons, assessing, judging. Abigail picked up the phone and spoke in hushed tones. Every so often, she glanced over at them. Moments passed. Then another airline employee approached. Margaret Hale, the gate supervisor. Her presence radiated authority and calm. "I'm told there's an issue," she asked. Abigail handed over the tickets and explained, her voice clipped and cautious. Margaret examined the tickets, then looked at the couple, then back at Abigail. "There's no issue here," she said finally, her voice firm. "These are valid first-class seats." But Abigail began. "No buts," Margaret interrupted. "Clear them to board." With a brisk nod, she walked over to the couple. "Mr. and Mrs. Preston, I apologize for the confusion. Please come forward. Your seats are ready." They walked forward without hesitation. Abigail stepped aside, visibly tense. Julian scanned his pass. As he walked through the gate, he turned briefly. "Thank you," he said, not to Abigail, but to Margaret. Sierra followed, her posture unbroken, her expression unreadable. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin buzzed softly with ambient noise and hushed conversation. A few heads turned as they entered. Some recognized them. Others didn't. They settled into their seats. Sierra unfolded the magazine. Julian took out his phone. Back at the gate, Abigail stood still, frozen. Margaret turned to her. "Come with me," she said. They stepped into a small office behind the counter. Margaret closed the door. "What happened out there?" she asked. "Tu wasn't sure," Abigail stammered. They didn't look like she stopped herself. "Like what?" Margaret asked, her voice steel. "Like first-class passengers?" Abigail said nothing. "That's not your call to make," Margaret said flatly. You let your biases interfere with your job. And now there are phones out. There are tweets. This is already in motion. Just then, Margaret's phone rang. She picked it up, listened, nodded, then hung up. That was corporate. The CEO's office wants a report. Now, Abigail turned pale. Inside the aircraft, Julian leaned over to Sierra and whispered, "It started." She nodded. "Let's make it count." Back in the airline's downtown headquarters, CEO Richard Langford sat in a sleek conference room, staring at his tablet. A video of the gate incident played on loop. His jaw tightened. "Give me the names of everyone involved," he said. By the time the plane touched down in San Diego, the video had gone viral. The hashtags were trending. News outlets had picked it up. Activists were calling for accountability. The next day, Richard Langford sat across from the Prestons in a private meeting room. His tone was serious. What happened was unacceptable. And it's not just about this incident, it's about everything it represents. We're going to change that. Sierra leaned forward. We're not here for an apology. We're here for change. Concrete change. Julian added, this won't stop with one employee. This is systemic. Langford nodded. Then let's start here. With training. With accountability. With transparency. You have my word. Over the weeks that followed, the airline implemented new policies, anonymous passenger feedback tools, mandatory diversity training, a public oversight committee. Abigail Rowe was terminated. Quietly, but definitively. The Prestons declined interviews. They declined publicity. Instead, they drafted an open letter calling for industry-wide reform. It was picked up on major outlets and became the foundation of a new movement among travelers and employees alike. They had turned a moment of discrimination into a catalyst for industry change. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it boards quietly, sits in 2A and 2B, and waits to be seen. And this time, the world saw it.